It's your position? That's clear.
Interview adjourned. Love you.
Kanye West. Yay. The name that once represented creative genius, groundbreaking music, and cultural revolution. But tonight, in this London studio, under these unforgiving lights, that name carries a different weight. The weight of words that have wounded an entire community and shattered the trust of millions. This isn't just another celebrity interview. This is a reckoning with one of the most documented cases of antisemitism in modern entertainment history. For months, Kanye's statements have dominated headlines, destroyed partnerships worth billions of dollars, and forced society to confront uncomfortable questions about celebrity influence, mental health, and the limits of free speech. The man sitting across from Piers Morgan tonight is not the confident superstar who once declared himself a god. His $3,000 Balenciaga hoodie, one of the few brands still willing to work with him, hangs loose on his frame. His usually animated hands rest uncharacteristically still in his lap. The trademark sunglasses are absent, revealing eyes that seem tired, haunted even. Piers Morgan has interviewed presidents, dictators, and killers, but tonight feels different. Tonight, he sits across from a man whose words have inspired hate crimes, whose influence has poisoned young minds, and whose fall from grace represents one of the most spectacular self-destructions in entertainment history. The studio is colder than usual. Security is unprecedented. Death threats have come from both those who support Kanye's statements and those who condemn them. Every word spoken tonight will be dissected, analyzed, and potentially used as evidence in the court of public opinion. This is the interview that could determine whether Kanye West finds a path to redemption or continues his descent into irrelevance. On Piers's desk lies a folder that could end what remains of Kanye's career. Screenshots, FBI reports, hospital records from victims, suicide notes from teenagers who couldn't handle the hatred his words unleashed. 24 months of documented devastation condensed into evidence that speaks louder than any song ever could. This isn't just television. This is a war crimes trial, disguised as entertainment. And the defendant has already pled guilty in the court of public opinion. Tonight's only question is whether he'll accept responsibility or burn down whatever goodwill remains in his scorched legacy. Yeah, Piers begins, his voice carrying the cold authority of a judge reading death sentences. Thank you for finally agreeing to this conversation. It took 6 months of requests, and what I can only assume was considerable courage on your part. Kanye looks up from hands that haven't stopped trembling since he walked through the studio doors 40 minutes ago. His $12,000 Rick Owens ensemble hangs on him like a costume from a play he no longer remembers how to perform. Courage, he repeats, the word tasting foreign in his mouth. That's funny. I haven't felt courageous in a long time. More like cornered. Cornered by whom? By my own words. The admission comes quick and raw, like blood from a fresh wound. By the consequences of things I can't take back. By the realization that I became the very thing I spent my whole life fighting against. It's an opening more honest than anyone expected. The Kanye West of 2 years ago would have deflected, blamed others, turned the conversation into performance art. This broken man seems incapable of anything but brutal self-awareness. What thing did you become? Piers probes. Though they both know the answer. A bigot. Kanye's voice drops to barely above a whisper. An anti-Semite. A man who used his platform to spread the same hatred that killed 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. The words hit the studio like physical objects. Camera operators exchange glances. Even in an age of constant confession and public apology, hearing someone voluntarily use such harsh terms about themselves feels unprecedented. That's a strong self-assessment, Piers observes. 2 years ago, you would have disputed those labels. 2 years ago, I was insane. Kanye's response is immediate and certain. Not clinically insane. I can't blame my bipolar diagnosis for moral failure. But spiritually insane, morally insane. I lost the ability to distinguish between personal grievance and ethnic hatred. The distinction between mental illness and moral choice is crucial, and Kanye seems to understand its importance without prompting. When did you regain that ability? The day I got a letter from Sarah Goldstein. Kanye's voice breaks slightly on the name. 94 years old, Holocaust survivor, lost her entire family at Auschwitz. She wrote to tell me that my words made her feel, for the first time since 1945, like it might not be safe to be Jewish in America. The specificity of the example transforms abstract harm into human reality. Piers leans forward, sensing this might be the key to whatever transformation has occurred. What did her letter do to you? It killed something inside me. Kanye's hands stop trembling as he speaks about the letter, as if the memory provides some kind of stability. The part of me that could justify hatred, the part that could blame other people for my problems, the part that could convince myself I was the victim. And what was born in its place? Shame. Real shame. The kind that makes you want to disappear from existence rather than face what you've become. The psychological honesty is startling. Most public figures in crisis mode focus on rehabilitation and image repair. Kanye seems focused on something more fundamental, confronting the reality of harm caused. But you didn't disappear. I tried. The confession comes with a weak smile that doesn't reach his eyes. I spent 3 months in a facility in Switzerland, not for mental health, for moral health, if such a thing exists, trying to understand how I became someone capable of inspiring violence against innocent people. The revelation of extended treatment suggests this conversation isn't the beginning of his reckoning, but perhaps the end of a longer process. What did you learn? That hatred is a drug. It makes you feel powerful when you're actually powerless. It gives you someone to blame when the real problem is you. And like any drug, it destroys everything you think it's helping. Piers reaches for his folder, and Kanye doesn't flinch. The terrified man of earlier seems to have been replaced by someone who has already seen the worst evidence against himself. I want to understand the progression, Piers says, opening to a timeline marked with red ink. This wasn't a single moment of poor judgment. This was a campaign that lasted 18 months. Longer, Kanye corrects. The public statements lasted 18 months. The private hatred started years earlier. The admission that his antisemitism predated his public expression of it suggests deeper roots than most people realized. When did it start? Around 2018. Business deals going wrong. Contracts I didn't understand being used against me. Lawyers and agents making decisions about my money and my career without consulting me. Kanye's voice takes on some of its old intensity. I started noticing patterns in the names of people who seemed to be controlling my life. Jewish names. Jewish names. The confirmation comes without hesitation. And instead of recognizing that I was looking for patterns that confirmed what I wanted to believe, I convinced myself the patterns were proof of conspiracy. The psychological mechanism of confirmation bias, explained with unusual clarity by someone who fell victim to it spectacularly. Who encouraged this thinking? Nick Fuentes was the most obvious one, but there were others. People in my circle who fed me statistics about Jewish representation in entertainment, who shared conspiracy theories disguised as research, who told me I was brave for speaking truth. The name dropping is significant. Nick Fuentes, a well-known white nationalist, represents the pipeline through which mainstream celebrities can be radicalized into extremist thinking. Why did you listen to them? Because they told me what I wanted to hear. Kanye's self-awareness is cutting. They told me my failures weren't my fault. They told me I was a victim of forces beyond my control. They told me I was being persecuted for my genius, rather than held accountable for my mistakes. The appeal of conspiracy thinking, its ability to transform personal responsibility into victimhood, is laid bare. Let's talk about the consequences, Piers says, flipping to a section marked with photographs. Because the harm wasn't theoretical, he slides a picture across the desk. Kanye glances at it and immediately looks away, his face draining of color. Tell me what you see. I can't. Kanye's voice is barely audible. I've seen it too many times. I have copies of every single photo, every police report, every hospital record. I make myself look at them every morning. The self-imposed penance suggests a level of accountability most public figures never reach. This is Rebecca Martinez, Piers continues, keeping the photo visible. 16 years old, Jewish student at UCLA. Beaten unconscious by classmates who chanted Kanye is right about the Jews during the assault. Each word lands like a physical blow. Kanye's shoulders shake as he's forced to confront the direct line from his words to violence against a child. She was in intensive care for 6 days. Piers continues relentlessly. Traumatic brain injury. Her parents had to explain to her younger siblings why their sister was nearly killed because of her religion. Stop, Kanye whispers. But Piers continues. Temple Sinai in Pittsburgh received 87 bomb threats in November 2022 alone. They had to cancel children's programming. Families were afraid to attend services. Please stop. A Holocaust memorial in Miami was vandalized with your quotes. Survivors who visit to honor their dead families had to see your words spray-painted next to swastikas. Kanye breaks down completely, his sobs echoing through the silent studio. This isn't performance. It's a man confronting the human cost of his hatred in excruciating detail. How many? He manages between sobs. How many people were hurt because of what I said? The FBI documented over 400 separate anti-Semitic incidents that directly referenced your statements. Piers responds with clinical precision. But the real number is impossible to calculate. How do you count a child too afraid to wear a Star of David to school? How do you measure an elderly person choosing to skip synagogue out of fear? The scope of the damage is oceanic, beyond any possibility of complete repair. I know, Kanye whispers. I know it can never be undone. I know some of those people will carry that fear for the rest of their lives because of me. Yay, Piers says, his voice taking on an almost therapeutic quality. I want to ask you something that might be uncomfortable. In those months when you were making these statements, did you ever think about your own experiences with racism? The question cuts to the heart of a profound irony. A black man who experienced racism, spreading ethnic hatred toward others. Kanye looks up, his eyes red but focused. Every day now, every single day, I think about how it felt to be called slurs, to be followed in stores, to be assumed to be dangerous because of my skin color. And I realize I did the exact same thing to Jewish people that racists did to me. The parallel is stated with devastating simplicity. I took negative experiences with individuals and used them to justify hatred toward an entire group. The recognition that he participated in the same logic that had oppressed him seems to cause physical pain. Did that occur to you at the time? No, because hatred makes you stupid. It makes you blind to your own contradictions. I convinced myself that anti-Semitism was different from anti-black racism, that Jewish people were somehow legitimate targets. How were they different in your mind? They weren't victims, they were oppressors. They had power, so attacking them was punching up rather than punching down. Kanye's explanation reveals the moral gymnastics required to justify hatred. I told myself I was fighting against systemic oppression when I was actually perpetuating it.
When did you realize that was false?
When I met David Goldstein, Sarah's grandson. Kanye's voice strengthens as he talks about this encounter. He showed me pictures of his family. 11 relatives murdered at Auschwitz. His grandmother arrived in America with nothing, speaking no English, traumatized beyond imagination. The personal becomes political, as abstract discussions of power are grounded in human reality. What did those pictures show you? That power isn't passed down through DNA. That trauma is. That the idea of Jews controlling the world is obscene when you're looking at pictures of Jewish children being murdered by people who believed the same lies I was spreading. The historical connection between contemporary anti-Semitism and genocide becomes undeniably personal. Sarah Goldstein's family didn't control anything. They were victims of the same kind of thinking that I was promoting. And I realized that if I had lived in 1930s Germany, I would have been the kind of person who helped make the Holocaust possible. The admission is perhaps the most damning thing he could say about himself, but also the most psychologically honest. That's a harsh self-assessment. It's an accurate one. I spread propaganda that dehumanized Jewish people. I gave my followers permission to see Jews as enemies rather than neighbors. I created a climate where violence became thinkable. The progression from rhetoric to violence, understood with painful clarity by someone who helped create it. What happens now? Piers asks. You've acknowledged causing tremendous harm. You've accepted responsibility. But acknowledgement without action is just an expensive therapy session. Kanye straightens in his chair for the first time, as if the question has given him solid ground to stand on after hours of confronting quicksand. I've already started, he says with quiet determination. 3 months ago, I liquidated my remaining assets, everything except basic living expenses, and created the Never Again Foundation. The name is loaded with historical significance, referencing the post-Holocaust commitment to preventing future genocides. What does the foundation do? Holocaust education in schools that lack resources for it, security funding for synagogues that can't afford protection, therapy support for victims of antisemitic violence. Each program is enumerated with the precision of someone who has thought deeply about practical applications. How much money? $73 million to start, more as I earn it. The figure represents virtually his entire remaining net worth after losing his major business deals. That's a substantial commitment. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's a beginning. Kanye's voice carries conviction rather than self-pity. Money can't undo trauma, but it can prevent future harm. What else? I'm working with the Anti-Defamation League to identify and counter anti-Semitic content online. When people post the same lies I spread, I respond personally, explaining why those lies are dangerous. The transformation from spreader of hatred to active opponent of it would be remarkable if sustained. I'm also speaking at schools, universities, anywhere that will have me, not to rehabilitate my image, but to show young people what anti-Semitism looks like and where it leads. The educational component recognizes that prevention is more valuable than cure. What's your message in those speeches? That hatred is always a choice. That when you're angry or hurt, you can choose to spread that pain to others, or you can choose to heal yourself and help others heal. Kanye's voice gains strength as he articulates his mission. That anti-Semitism isn't just wrong. It's ancient, it's deadly, and it's always based on lies. How do audiences respond? Some hate me. Some think I'm lying. Some think this is all an act to get my deals back. Kanye seems unbothered by the skepticism. But some listen, and if even one person chooses differently because of what I share about my own mistakes, then the humiliation is worth it. The focus on impact, rather than reception, suggests genuine transformation, rather than image management. There's something else, Kanye adds quietly. I'm donating my entire music catalog to Holocaust memorial organizations. The gesture is startling in its magnitude. These songs represent not just financial value, but artistic legacy, the work that established his greatness. Your life's work? My life's work was supposed to be about love, about breaking down barriers, about bringing people together. Instead, I used my platform to spread division and hatred. Kanye's voice carries profound regret. If that music can now fund education that prevents future hatred, then maybe it serves the purpose it was always meant to serve. As the interview draws toward its close, Piers asks the question that has hung unspoken throughout their conversation. Do you believe you can be redeemed? Kanye is quiet for a long time, considering not just the question but the presumption behind it, that redemption is something to be achieved, rather than granted. I don't know if redemption is the right word, he finally responds. Redemption suggests returning to a previous state of grace, but I can't go back to who I was before, because who I was before was capable of becoming who I became. The psychological insight suggests that true transformation requires acknowledging fundamental rather than superficial change. What I can do is become someone different, someone who has learned from causing tremendous harm, someone who uses that knowledge to prevent others from making the same choices. Some people will never forgive you, and they're right not to. Kanye's acceptance of permanent consequences is striking. Some damage is irreversible. Some trust, once broken, can never be repaired. And that's my burden to carry, not theirs to forgive. How do you live with that? By accepting that forgiveness isn't the goal. Prevention is. If I spend the rest of my life preventing even one act of anti-Semitic violence, then my life after this will have been more valuable than my life before it. The reorientation from self-focused goals to other-focused service represents a fundamental shift in values. What do you want people to take away from this conversation? Kanye turns directly toward the main camera, his eyes clear despite the exhaustion of the past hours. I want them to understand that anti-Semitism is never about Jewish people. It's about the person spreading it, their anger, their fear, their need to blame someone else for their problems. His voice gains urgency. Every conspiracy theory about Jewish people is really a confession about the person spreading it. He pauses, then continues with growing conviction. I want young people especially to understand that hatred feels powerful, but it makes you weak. It feels like truth, but it's always based on lies. It feels like strength, but it destroys everything you think you're protecting. And finally, I want them to understand that it's possible to be completely wrong, morally, factually, spiritually wrong, and still find a path forward if you're willing to accept the truth about yourself and do the work to change. As Kanye turns back from the camera, the studio settles into profound quiet. This has been 2 hours of television, unlike any other, not entertainment, but education in the form of confession. Accountability disguised as interview. Last question, Piers says gently. If you could say one thing to Sarah Goldstein, what would it be? That her letter saved my soul, Kanye responds without hesitation. That her courage in reaching out to someone who had hurt her community gave me the strength to face what I had become. That her forgiveness, not of me, but of the possibility that people can change, made my transformation possible. The interview ends not with absolution, but with acknowledgement of harm caused, responsibility accepted, and work that must continue for the rest of his life. As the cameras finally stop rolling, Kanye West sits in his chair, looking simultaneously depleted and renewed, like someone who has died and been reborn, as someone fundamentally different. Whether this transformation will prove lasting, whether his actions will match his words, whether redemption is possible for someone who caused such widespread harm, these questions can only be answered by time and sustained effort. But in this studio, on this night, one of the most influential artists of his generation offered something rarer than apology and more valuable than excuses: complete accountability, specific action, and recognition that some consequences last forever, regardless of future good works. The silence that follows contains all the weight of what was spoken and all the uncertainty of what comes next.